I'm Catherine Lemmer. I'm the Executive Director of the Lake Forest Library. On behalf of myself and Eric Bailey, my colleague, who is the Director at Lake Bluff Public Library, and our library boards and staff, we welcome you to the 4th annual Read Between the Ravines, our two-community, one-book read. We are so very excited this evening to be bringing Read Between the Ravines back to the Gorton Community Center after 2 years as a virtual program. Thank you, as always, to Amy Wegliardo and her team here and her staff for partnering with us and providing this wonderful program space. In past years, the libraries have brought authors that have generated important community conversations. In 2019, we started with Dan Egan and his work on the death and life of the Great Lakes. In 2020, Chris McGreal joined us to discuss his work, American Crisis, the Opioid Tragedy in 3 Acts. And last year, Michelle Pond joined us to discuss her memoir, Reading with Patrick. Each of these works prompted enlightening and interesting conversations around compelling issues. We are excited to continue this tradition this evening. In the months leading up to this evening, many members of the community have participated in book clubs, panel discussions, and presentations around fashion and its impact on the environment and critical social issues. We anticipate that this library conversation will continue this evening. Tonight, we are pleased to welcome Ron Hirasawa, environmentalist and entrepreneur, in conversation with Maxine Bédat about her compelling and thought-provoking work, Unraveled, the Life and Death of a Garment. Ron is a true Renaissance man, having a long career as an educator, a management and strategic consultant, innovator, entrepreneur, and executive coach. A lifelong environmentalist, Ron represents our partner this evening, the Lake Forest Lake Bluff Rotary Club. Ms. Bédat is regularly featured as an expert by Bloomberg, the Financial Times, the New York Times, Vogue, Forbes, and CNN. She is the founder and director of New Stanford Institute, which collaborates with scientists and citizens to ensure the fashion industry is ethical, equitable, and environmental. She co-founded and was the CEO of Zadie, a brand focused on transparency and sustainability in the fashion industry. Under her leadership, Zadie was named one of the world's most innovative companies in retail by Fast Company. We are grateful to our partners, Gorton Community Center, for their assistance in hosting tonight's program, and also a thank you to Rotary for introducing us to Ron and his work on environmental issues. And as usual, thank you to our amazing local independent bookstore, the Lake Forest Bookstore. Eric and I both thank Jillian Chapman, Community Engagement Coordinator at Lake Bluff Library, and Michelle Doshi, Adult Services Library and Lake Forest Library, for their innovative work in designing and delivering all the programming around tonight's Read Between the Ravines capstone project. It is their tenacity and dedication that makes Read Between the Ravines one of our most successful community efforts. At the end of the program, there will be an opportunity for questions and a book signing. So again, welcome, thank you for coming, and now to our featured speakers for tonight's program.
Welcome.
Thank you.
I appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to us and share your insights on the fashion industry and where it's going, where it's been, and what it's doing.
Thank you. So it's really great to be here and to be with people. Okay.
So this is the book. If you haven't had a chance to read it, I know that the Lake Forest Library has over 30 copies, and Lake Bluff Library, I'm not sure how many copies, but maybe it'll help bridge the gap with the supply chain issues that we're having with the book. Speaking of which, Maxine is a true entrepreneur with great bona fides. She has a law degree from Columbia University, worked in the courts of the Rwandan Criminal Tribunal. And she's a co-founder with Soraya Dorabi of Zadie, an ethical fashion brand. And I think you knew each other in high school.
That's right.
Okay. And you're the founder and director of the New Standard Institute. And it's important to know the difference, because she's not just the founder of Think Tank, it's a think and do tank. So we're anxious to learn more about that. And now the author of Unraveled, which I think was, you said 10 years in the making?
I guess so, yes.
Doing research? don't you share with us what is some drivers that got you to this point, writing the book, being a voice in the fashion industry, being behind fashion initiatives in New York State?
So yes, as you mentioned, I went to law school, so I wasn't planning a career in this space. I think what happened was in law school and before law school, actually, I had an opportunity. I went to undergrad in New York as well, and I got to work at the UN, and it was at the time where the Millennial Development Goals were being set up, which now are making the Sustainable Development Goals, and they were all quite siloed issues of education and women's health and poverty alleviation and climate and good governance, and it was one year was the year of soil and the year of water, and it all just seemed very siloed. And I got to spend time when I was at the Rwandan Criminal Tribunal. At the Rwandan Criminal Tribunal, where outside of the court, the Rwandan Criminal Tribunal was in Arusha, Tanzania, and grew up in Minneapolis, in where Target is headquartered, where the Mall of America is. So I grew up knowing how products were sold to me, but it was the first time in Tanzania, I would go to the different markets, and I had this habit of just asking where things were coming from, and I would go to the town where the things were made, and it was the first time for me, like as somebody, a millennial growing up in Minnesota, that I actually saw how things were made. And I will never forget, I went to one town that I was tracking back these baskets, I wanted to get a lot of them. And I went into the town, this was in Tanzania, and on the one side of the main road was all dried fish stands. And on the other side, it was all like basket sellers. I thought that's so weird. Like, why would a town be known for fish and baskets? Like, it's such a random combination. And then, lo and behold, that town was on the banks of a river, and of course, fish come from river, and the baskets were made from reeds, which grow by rivers. And like that was just such a stupid aha moment. You're like, oh, that's how baskets are made. Like, interesting. And so it was this kind of the beginning of this real obsession with like how things were made, what was their story, like how much were the people paid, how did I get to find out about them, and then it was in that sort of exploration, working in Arusha, that I got interested in how markets sort of functioned and how they connected with the work that the UN was trying to advance. And then I started working with artisans, and from there learned about textiles, and then from there started working in the fashion space, because sorry, this is a very long answer to the question. But like growing up, I always appreciated, I wasn't like a fashionista, but I appreciated clothing, and I liked clothing and how it made me feel, like, and so I understood the cultural power of clothing and how it's something we all, we're all wearing clothes. And so it was all something that we could connect to. And once I started uncovering all of these layers, then I realized, like, oh, all of these things that the UN is trying to work at actually are woven into the story and our relationship to clothing. And so that's how I got involved.
Very important. Thanks for that as well. There's a story behind this as well. It says clean air, water, energy. So yours truly was at the first Earth Day over 50 years ago. 2 years ago. In Kansas City, Missouri. And I thought in honor of that, I had some of these buttons printed up for Rotary. You might want to let me know. Is it possible possible we could get the slide up for the various steps of the supply chain? Okay, there they are. Fiber creation, yarn and textile creation, cut and sew, distribution, purchase, and disposal. Now, for many of us, purchase is not all we really have good experience or bad experience with. And not thinking about where the materials come from, how it's woven, how textiles are created, the dye that permeates jeans. And we look at jeans as an exploding category over the past couple of decades at least, and thinking about fashion for recreation, for school, for sports activities, for work, and so on. So jeans have really become a symbol for a garment life cycle. It's $2.5 trillion with a T as in tango. And footwear industry is responsible for over 8% of global gas house emissions. The clothing it creates sheds plastic microfibers equivalent to 50 billion water bottles a year. And it consumes enormous amounts of water and toxic chemicals. It's also an industry that's rife with unsafe conditions, child labor, other exploitative practices amounting to modern-day slavery, especially for girls and young women. Ideally, where would one start to address environmental impact and sustainability in the textile industry? We've already got a head start, so would you like to comment on that?
Sure. So, it's been very interesting. I've been in this space for about 10 years, and the conversation has luckily changed quite dramatically in that time. You know, when I got started in the previous company, Zadie, and we were talking about the impact of garments, people were looked at us like we were crazy. What are you doing? Why does it matter? And now, you know, there's, I am reminded that it was your generation that started Earth Day, but Gen Z is credited with being very mindful of the environment or care about the environment. And so you have this young generation that's very vocal about what's happening with climate, And so we've gone, and I am promised to get to the answers to the question. We've gone from people not knowing or caring or not even being aware that there is an issue with the fashion industry to now a young generation that really does care a great deal. But the communicators of sustainability in the fashion industry has been the marketing teams within fashion companies. And so that's why at the moment you have a lot of marketing sustainable claims in fashion that don't really hold water. So I'm saying all of that as context is the answer is not like buy this thing that has been marketed to you as sustainable, although there is very important work being done. It's very hard to decipher as a consumer. The thrust of the work that I do now is working on legislation. So like creating the equivalent of the fuel efficiency standards for the auto industry, but doing that for the apparel industry. And that is one significant way that we can see change in the industry is by setting regulation for requirements of how companies should operate. So the work that my organization now is doing is working to advance legislation in New York called the Fashion Act. Other states have picked it up, Illinois picked it up. That would require companies to set and achieve science-based targets. So it would require the industry to operate within the bounds of the Paris Agreement. So that's kind of one big area. And then, you know, with individual purchasing, individuals can also make their voices heard by being just more considerate of being more considerate, I should say, about what they are purchasing. And for that, especially with young people, is just like knowing what you like and slowing down your clothing consumption. Because the big problem has been that we've had this new business model of fast fashion that wasn't around when I was a kid, and is now the dominant business model in the fashion industry, like Zara, H&M, and now there are new companies like Shein and Boohoo that are even cheaper and faster. And it's that disposability that's fueling so much of this great impact. So in terms of what can be done, we can address these things legislatively, and then from our individual purchasing decisions, we can like remove the noise of all the marketing messages so that we really care and connect to our clothes and keep our clothes and wear them for a long time. Because the single biggest driver of reducing the impact is how many times you're wearing that garment. And so that's the most important thing that one can do is wear your garment more.
So one of the things that I'd like to point out is this idea of environmental impact and sustainability in the textile industry. And people around the world, particularly like Maxine, are redefining what that means. Sustainable used to be content with defining greenwashing and little bits of organic here in terms of raising the raw materials of plants. But sustainability means more than that. Want to comment on that, about what sustainability means?
Sure. Yeah, so sustainability has come, to be this marketing term that can mean just about anything, but sustainability, right, is like that, it's a system that can last. That is, really what it's about. And so when it, comes to the fashion industry, we have to create systems that aren't so exploitative of land and labor that we still have land and labor to turn to. And so that's really like what sustainability is. When it comes to fashion, as you were mentioning, the major areas of impact are carbon use and the climate, chemical use and chemical management, the microplastic pollution, because our clothing is now predominantly plastic-based fibers, and then labor as well. So it's the industry with the highest usage of forced labor and child labor, because it's an industry that can move from place to place pretty easily. And so there's, it's been part of the sort of global race to the bottom. So sustainability is ensuring that we can use those water systems, that we can, so your clean air, water, and energy, that we keep the air clean, keep the water clean, don't contribute so much carbon that we create the climate crisis, and then have jobs that are actually sustaining jobs. So that's really what sustainability is all about.
So sustainability is taking on a whole new category of meaning in this world. Sustainability is not just being able to regrow the plants and redo the process again. It's to make a better world, basically, because it has to do with wages, has to do with living conditions, working conditions, raw material usage, the amount of pollution control, environmental damage and control that we have as well. So one of the things that you stated in the book, which I like because it has a lot of data as a teacher, is that 1.25 billion, as in data, billion pairs of jeans are sold every year, and that the average U.S. woman has 7 pairs in her closet. So how many pairs do you have?
Has to have more than that. Yeah, the reason why I am a consumer, but I am my target audience in this book. So, but I do keep them for a very long time. But this was asked for, and so I had to go and count, and I'm embarrassed to say that I think I have about 20 fifteen. But it is, that is, first of all, I grew up in the generation of fast fashion, right? Like, as I said, I am the product of this book. I did not grow up attending Earth Day events when I was young. It was really only in being a part of the system that I saw the problem with the system. And so, yeah, so I live with that accumulation. But I now have a much more connected relationship. And I think, what is important to see for also additional data in the book is that 1 in 3 young people, there hasn't been enough data, there's very limited data about how many times people are wearing their clothes or the actual use of clothing. And the little that has been done was a study in the UK that found that 1 in 3 young women find clothing old after wearing it once or twice. So it's just like, yeah, I mean, it's a dramatic change in the relationship that I think this audience has, compared to how young people growing up, how they perceive and how they're marketed clothing. So it might seem a lot at 20, but it's even more dramatic. Young people, their relationship with clothing today.
So the $64 question, have you worn all those?
Oh yeah, yeah, I'm definitely, I'm definitely wearing all of those.
Great. So one of the nice things is we have permission now to rewear the clothing up to what, 30 times?
You can wear them many more times.
And that's a new sheet, as opposed to having something brand new every time you go to a party or an outing or make the neighbor jealous. So the cotton for 200 years has been the ideal textile and grown in more than 80 countries and produces over 10 billion pounds a year. In fact, the United States, I think, is one of the 3rd largest producer in the world of cotton. So do you think the age of cotton has reached its pinnacle in favor of synthetic materials like polyester, which hopefully not too environmentally hazardous, but microplastics, pollution, energy consumption versus natural fibers like linen?
No, I mean, I am a big fan of natural fibers, and I think the chart is in the book, but there is the rise of polyester is dramatic. This chart in the book, but it's like cotton has been like pretty constant and steady in terms of production for the last 75 years, and linen is a little bit constant, and then wool, sorry, in between. And then you take polyester, which was like nothing, and it's just exploded. And this intersection right here was in 2000. In 2001 when H9 first opened in New York. So it's completely connected. This use of synthetics is highly connected to the fast fashion, the rise of the fast fashion industry. And so I grew up liking fast fashion, thinking that I did. And what, my first foray into all of this was, I had, like, living in New York, I had this, closet overflowing with clothing, and yet I felt like I had nothing to wear. And, that was like often dismissed as like, oh, it's like such a girly thing, a woman's problem. But there was one day I got just very frustrated with that. And I just like, why is it? What is even in here? And I took down all my clothes and I divided it into the pile that I did wear and those that I did not wear. And I tried to understand like what it was that I was actually wearing and why. It is important, like, for people like younger than me too, like clothing has never been expensive for them. So they've never really like had to think about what their style is. And so that's why we have that disconnect. And so it was through this process, to get to answer your question, it was through this process that I started to look at the tags and just read, like, what is the pile, like, what is the stuff made out of the things that I wore, and what is the stuff made out of the things that I didn't. And it was through that exploration that first I realized, like, fit seemed to be the main reason why I wore it and wear. And then the second was like the material, and that I really liked the natural material. That's the things that felt most comfortable and nice. But I didn't even know. I didn't Google what polyester was. And by the way, in that Googling process, if you Google, at least at the time, is linen, it auto completes to is linen cotton. Like, we don't have any, people just don't know what fibers are anymore. And so I don't think that synthetics are the future. I think they were packaged as the future. But now we're seeing the problems that they're creating with this microplastic pollution and the energy intensity of them to begin with. So no, I don't think cotton has its own issues, but I don't see it fading into the.
Linen is made from flax.
It is.
Right.
The same stuff you put.
So you can drink it, eat it, wear it. So, what about the safety of natural material, jute, flax, bamboo, wool, linen, hemp?
The safety of them?
They much safer than the microplastics from polyester?
Well, so we have to think of, in this supply chain, think of, what are we talking about when we're talking about safety? So if you're just talking about your fiber and you're ignoring the rest of the process, then your natural fibers are going to generally have a lower carbon footprint. They won't produce microplastic pollution. They do produce microfiber pollution, but it's not perpetual in the same way that microplastic pollution. But this is going back to the word sustainable. The fiber process is only part of the broader process of production. And so if you take something like greenhouse gas emissions, if you say oh, I'm going to buy this organic cotton t-shirt and feel really good about it and think I'm doing something sustainable, well, that cotton might have been grown organically, which means it's not using synthetic pesticides or herbicides, but the process afterwards could be very carbon intensive, very synthetic chemical intensive. So it's really when we're thinking about the impact of our clothing, we can't just think about the impact of the fiber. We actually have to know the impact of the entire thing, because if we take, again, just isolating the climate issue, the hotspot of carbon emissions in this life cycle is actually at the yarn and textile production. It's not a farm. 76% of the carbon footprint of our clothing happens at the textile mill. So we have to, and by we I mean the industry, has to look at things holistically and not put it on the citizen, consumer to get a PhD in sustainability to just buy their.
Thank you. So just a little housekeeping. If you have a burning question, or any questions at all, just write them down on a piece of paper that you were provided with a pencil, and pass them over to the aisle. We'll try to address your question. Also, just from a definition standpoint, fast fashion, where did that come from? And what do you define it as?
Yeah, I'm not sure who coined the term, but fast fashion is a business model that is based off of introducing new clothing on a continuous basis. So it was a break from the model of first having four collections, well, 2 collections a year, then 4 collections a year, and then the fast fashion, then it was 6 collections a year, and then the fast fashion businesses just introduced clothing on a continuous basis so that people continuously buy them. So a new company that was just raised a bunch of money that was just valued at a few $1 billion, introduces thousands of new styles every day. That's fast fashion.
Right. So, I think to get a look at the sales historically, every time you introduce a new collection, so companies like H&M, Zara, Target, etc., now Walmart and Amazon are trying to introduce new products every day to continue that bleed or bump. So we have $1 billion or pounds, I'm sorry, £1 billion per year of used clothing, mostly from charitable contributions. And I've always been mystified as to exactly what happens to those when I put them out for the Salvation Army or the Veterans or drop them off at some other charitable organization. What happens to those things? So approximately 65% of the value of used clothing is accounted for just by the 2 countries, United Kingdom and the United States of America, and the preferred quality sources of used clothing. So why is that? Is it just the fact that it's better quality, better design, or does it come from some historical precedent?
I think it's better quality, better design. We're really good consumers of clothing. And so and then there is a tradition in the UK and in the US of donating clothing. So the system is the most, is the fastest and most robust in the US.
Okay. So that sin of not using our clothing productively or wearing it enough follows us here into the charity end of this, giving it away, because a lot of times some double-digit percentage is new. Maybe 20% of the clothing that's thrown out in these 2 countries has never been worn, might have the original tag.
Yeah, and you see this when you go to the secondhand markets where they ultimately end up. You can see several tags. You see the new clothing tag, and then you see the Salvation Army tag that tried to sell it, and then it's now in the secondhand market.
So what happens to these clothing, whether they're new or used, but they're given away? What happens to them? Where do they end up?
Yeah, so I was definitely, grew up, believing when I cleaned out my closet and gave clothes away and got, tax write-off, and like that I was, doing a good thing, and that this was clothing that was, going to people in need. This is my general thought of what happened. In doing research for the book, I learned of the inner working. So if you donate your clothing, say to the Salvation Army, they first sort it out, and it's not like a science. It's basically, would you, as it was described to me, the sort of like would say, would they ever wear it? And so the answer is yes. Then it makes its way onto the sales floor. And I think even in the donation, like when it's donated, I forget, but like something like only 60% of the clothes that are donated even make it on the sales floor. And just remember, it's a sales floor. So the Salvation Army aren't giving the clothes away; they are giving it away. They are selling it, and the sales of that fund their programs. That's how it works. So when they put it on the floor, and people who are in this world know it deeply, right? Like it gets about 4 weeks to be sold on the floor. And each week the color tag changes, and you get deeper discounts every week. And the very shocking to me, at least, was that of all the things that are donated, 96% of that does not get sold. Yeah, good. Everybody agrees with that, shocking. So the stuff that doesn't get sold, and then the stuff that never even made it on the floor to begin with, are then baled up together. So when I went to the Salvation Army in New York, and like on the top floor is the sorting floor, and they bale it up, and then it goes and is they sell it per bale to these middlemen, people who then take that, unbale it, sort it again, but then they're sorting it by summer women's tops, men's like jeans, men's bottoms, suiting, and like so coats would then be sold off to Eastern Europe, and the summer clothing tends to go to the developing world. So I traveled to Ghana, which is a big secondhand clothing market, and then there it is purchased. They're put in these opaque bales, and you can see the donors, the company tags, and the people who are purchasing it are purchasing the bale, and they don't know what's in the bale. So there is a lot of financial precarity, often women sellers, and they are often in debt in getting these bales. And part of the problem is with the rise of fast fashion, the quality of clothing has gone down. And so there's very limited research, but the part that the research that has been done in this market, Contamonto market in Accra, Ghana, was that 40% of the clothing that was then being sold in this market was never sold at all. Couldn't find a home regardless of the price, and then it ended up in this landfill that was on fire that I visited. And so the broader story is that we are not doing a beneficial thing overall. We're dumping our excesses on places that don't have the capacity to handle it. That's what happens.
Well, there's a continuing saga about sustainability here at work, because sustainability is not confined just to textiles. Sustainability in terms of a living wage, for example. I was struck by the stories that you wrote about kayeyes, which are female porters that work in these markets, and they carry 121-pound bales from the boats on their heads all day long for a couple of dollars.
Yes, there's exploitation up and down the system, and the Kaye women are a part of that. And you like often the image of women in Africa are have their ability to their strength in carrying these, but there's nothing superhuman about African women's strength, and it is like a very dangerous job, and they have a lot of health emergencies, but they are paid like $1 a day, and the reason why they're carrying it on their head is not culture. It's because the informal market in Contamonto can't, nothing with wheels, so you can't pull them along, so they have to be hand carried. And there's some very devastating stories of these women who are often migrants. There's a lot of migratory labor in the whole up and down the fashion industry, because that's can be the most exploited often. But of women carrying their kids at the same time, and really just dramatically awful things with bearing so much weight.
Well, sometimes they're an expert.
Yes.
It's devastating. So the secondhand market keeps most developing countries countries at the mercy of the more developed countries like the US and UK. So I think that probably within the supply chain components, some of that is captured with distribution, disposal. How are we doing here? Time. Okay. So what about the sorting process? I thought that was pretty interesting, where you find in Continental and other markets where people are sorting into 1, 2, and 3 tier grading. And also was surprised, I think, in developing markets, maybe they're working for pennies per day, but the owners of some of the businesses or stalls might make $100,000 a week US, because they're good at sorting. And the stuff, they have customers that they call up and say, I've got the suit that you're looking for in excellent shape. They can mark up on that. About 80% is discarded or given away after sorting, with over 50% buried in landfills, like you had in Ghana. Wearing clothes twice as long could reduce greenhouse gases and maybe diminish the impact of these markets as well. But I was surprised and really kind of fearful thinking about the greenhouse gases that are released: CO2, methane, formaldehyde, acetaldehyde, carcinogens like butadiene and benzene.
Yeah, so when the clothing, so when I was in Ghana, following the life of a pair of jeans, I went to the landfill that serviced this market. So the people who can make the money are not the shop sellers so much as the middlemen, the people who buy the containers and then sell them to the shop sellers. The shop sellers bear the most risk because they don't know what they're getting. Yeah, the shop sellers then open their bale and they divide it into first, second, thirds. And the first are the thing that hopefully is going to pay them back, the best quality. And you go into these, once you get used to a place like Continental, at first to me it was like extremely disorienting, very anxiety-inducing, because like lots of hawkers, everybody's like hawking their stuff. But once you get used to it, like it's a mall, like it is a mall. There are different departments, and the shop sellers can be very good curators. And the first is that like things that they will put up, and then the seconds are the things that they hope to sell. The thirds and under are the things that they would never be able to sell because like there is something damaged or completely doesn't make sense for the environment or things like that. And so there's a rhythm and a routine for the week of when new shipments come in, and so they have like a week to make their money back from the bale that they've opened. And then each successive day, you see, if you go at the right times, you see these like in the intersections of the stores, there's like piles of clothing at each intersection, and that's the unders. That's the stuff they're not going to be able to sell. And they're also like, it's this constant flood, right? Like they are going to purchase a new bale like every week, so they have to sell that stuff in the week. And so the things that are unable to be sold like go into these mounds, and then the garbage collection picks them up and takes them to the Capone landfill. And that the Capone had like, there is trash management, and it was supposed to be divided into 4 quadrants, so that if you had one issue in one part of the landfill, it wouldn't extend to the other parts. But because there was this flood of clothing coming in that was not anticipated, a landfill that was supposed to last for something like 12 years was full already 4 years. So all of their safety precautions went out the window. They lacked capacity. And so instead of there being 4 quadrants, it was all one big pile. So the day that I was there must have been like coal that got in to the waste stream. And so there was a fire. Yeah, I remember just negotiating with the manager for plumbing. Like, no, we were told that we could come. He's like, well, you're really seeing a big problem here, but I guess you have to see it. And so I went and like climbed up this clothing mountain basically, and by the time I got to the top, there was a ton of smoke and a fire, and I was just like, this would be just a really stupid way to die, and so I ran down the mountain, and I was running away from these flames and smoke, and I think that I did the research in the same, like in this order. So by the time I was at the Burning Man, like I had seen how much had gone into creating all of those clothes, and I was just like, it was so disgusting. Like it's just going up in flames, yeah, couldn't have poetically driven the point home more.
Well, it's kind of startling to realize that the majority of clothing that you don't wear, give away, or donate is actually being destroyed. A lot of it is new. This is not a sustainable practice from a textile standpoint, lifestyle standpoint, industrial standpoint, or anything else in terms of trade. Because of some limitations of time, I'm going to just hopefully pique your interest in buying this book or checking it out if you haven't. There's some very specific things that Maxine recommends when you look at style, fit, fabric quality to how evaluating clothing that you're going to buy. Starting with the power in your purse, organizing your closet, Marie Kondo. Does it spark joy? Does it fit me well? Does it feel good? How's the garment constructed? Where will I wear it? How much this costs? How much the cost per wear might be if it's special? And who do I want to support? And I think that Maxine had told you earlier that women wear an estimated 20% of the wardrobes that they actually purchase. So it doesn't make much sense. And I think that we're going to see some changes in this industry, largely due to people like Maxine, the New Standard Institute. She also talks about sustainable and slow fashion in her book. Now maybe we could have her talk to us about what she's doing at New Standard Institute there, because I'm very admiring of the think and do parts. You're not going to find many think tanks that end up doing something about it instead of just lobbying or creating research papers. So what about New Standard Institute? And want to talk about the fashion then?
Yeah, I'd love to. So, yeah, the research for the book and the launch of the New Standard Institute happened hand in hand. And it was because I knew that, I would be advocating for policy, but I felt it was disingenuous to be advocating for policy if I didn't know firsthand the nuances of everybody's perspective in the supply chain, from the farmers to both garment workers and factory owners and textile owners and government officials. I really wanted to understand what was motivating everybody. And so, yeah, the way that I could do that and get paid for it was to write a book about it too. And I'm so, for me personally, thrilled that I did that, because writing it is the best way to really have to nail down what you think about something and really synthesize one's own thoughts. So it was a dramatic effect. so it was great to be able to do that. And really from that journey, it's not, I didn't have, I had some ideas, but I actively tried to not have preconceived notions about what the answer should be. It was really through this journey that things were crystallized for me. And part of that journey was seeing how we're kind of told to do individual, like consuming as our way to create policy, to create change. And what I really took away was actually we are citizens, and we forget that, and that the way that we can really make change is by changing the laws, so the rules of the system, and so that the New Standard Institute now what we do is we are the voice of the researchers and the people with real lived experience. So what has happened in the fashion space, as I was talking about at the beginning, was sustainability has been communicated through brand marketing, and that's been really driving the conversation. And so the New Standard Institute is an independent voice. It's just the voice of what the researchers have found, and what the farmers and garment workers and textile owners, their experiences. And so from that, legislation has become an important focus as a way to create the basic rules of the game. It's also part of the work that we do at the New Standard Institute, though not as loudly, is working with brands. And so we work with companies about what they can, true sustainable strategies that they can adopt. And what I found in doing that work was we would work with the sustainability teams, and what I quickly learned was there was, power dynamics that they really cared, but they couldn't get their CFO to give them the budget to do the work that they wanted to do. And why couldn't the CFO give them the budget? Because that budget could be utilized elsewhere to improve their bottom line faster, better. And so I understand that what we need is legislation so that everybody is, everybody's at a level playing field, so that the companies that are doing the work aren't put at a competitive disadvantage from the companies that are not, so that it was ultimately the right thing for business to develop legislation. So the Fashion Act is a piece of a New York bill that sets the requirement for any company, any apparel company that has more than $100 million in global gross receipts that is selling to New York, of how they have to operate when it comes to climate, chemical management, labor practices, and then there's a disclosure around material use. So it's really setting the floor. Companies can do more, but it's setting the floor for how companies can operate and must operate.
Yes, and holding people accountable in those companies. I think you're going to see a revolutionary sweep started by people like Maxine, I don't think there's any other companies or regulatory agencies doing internal audits for companies like that, but it will happen.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So let's just take a minute here and okay. We'll try to pick a few here. Do high-end retailers use manufacturers that pay higher wages necessarily?
Great question. It's a great question. It's a hard question. This is what I'll really be a lawyer. Like generally, yes. If you're taking like a fashion product that's like, like $2 t-shirt, there is no way in the economics of that you are paying the person who is cutting and sewing that garment, a wage that they can live off of. So you are in that really non-high-end fast fashion, you are by the business model guaranteeing that labor is not getting paid decently. On the higher end, there is more margin to play with that they could be. And so you tend to see less exploitation, but there are exceptions, to all of that. So yes, like generally, they can be better, but it doesn't, certainly doesn't guarantee.
If there's anybody in the room that wouldn't pay another buck or two to create better living conditions and wages and education and safety for people in this supply chain. That's the bottom line. If you care, do something about it. Maxine is. So maybe we have time for another one. Being very patient, thank you. So will we see more innovation in fashion, similar to sneakers when Nike started weaving shoes like socks and adding to sales, eliminates 133 steps, 3D printed clothes, no seams. So in other words, the bottom line is the same question we talked about earlier. What kind of innovative practices do you see having some lasting impact on the industry, whether it's automation or 3D printing or creating dyes that are all natural?
Yeah, so there seems to be a lot of innovation in this space for, with water use, with between printing, although I think that has limited, but where I would like to see the innovation and where I think is, maybe perhaps less sexy than like pineapple leather, is in the textile mill. And where the major carbon hotspot is in the supply chain of companies working together to help finance the energy efficiency upgrades that these mills need, so they're not running on coal energy. Those are the type of innovations that are really going to move the needle, statistically and globally. That's what we're really need to do. But there are other, there's 3D printing, there's work being done on like microfiber filters in washing machines. So there are advances. There's a big part of the problem in the fashion industry is textile recycling. There isn't a great ability to do that. The same as like putting a bottle and making a bottle of it. We don't have that capacity, and a big problem in the industry is a lot of fibers, like if you look at your text now, they're probably blended material, so you're blending the polyester and the cotton, and there's no way to unblend it. And so part of the research is like, how do you dissolve it into different things and then reconstitute it? And so that's some of the innovations, but regardless of any of that, which needs to be invested in, we need to have business model innovations and not rely on continuous introduction of new stuff that we don't even wear as the business model. So I think it's a really interesting work in innovation now, which is actually, who has used the real in this? Like that's an innovation. That's that is what is Real? The Real is an e-commerce high-end used clothing platform. I have used it, And that is a public company now. There's lots of innovation and money being put in the space of continuing the life of clothing, so that if you are no longer interested, if it's something that is high end, there will likely be somebody that is. So those are all back end innovations that are expanding, and now reuse and secondhand clothing. Now companies are seeing that there's money to be made in it. So a lot of luxury goods companies are now incorporating resale as part of their business model, which is innovation in and of itself.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your expertise, research, scholarship, and taking the time to come and talk to us. Thank you very much, Sarah.
Good evening. I'm Eric Bailey, Director of the Lake Bluff Public Library, and it is my sad responsibility to bring events this evening to a close. So a huge thank you to everyone joining us here this evening. The support of the communities of Lake Bluff and Lake Forest are an essential part of the success of Read Between the Ravines. If you do have a copy of the book and would like to get a autograph from the author, a signature, have it signed, you can proceed as we head out to the solarium, which you will head out the exits in the back and then take a left, and it's right out the end of the hallway. Unfortunately, we succeeded in semi-ironically creating a local supply shortage of books, so we do not have copies on hand for sale this evening, but we do have book plates that can be signed and can then later be included in a copy that you will later purchase. So we do have those on hand if you do not have a book with you. In conclusion, thanks again to Maxine Bédat and Ron Hirasawa this evening. Another round of applause, I think, is in order. Excellent, thought-provoking discussion this evening. And in conclusion, please travel safely on your way home. Thank you.